It's the 19th of September 2002, and I'm Negley Harte, and I'm here with Giorgio Riello behind the camera at the home in Cambridge of Professor Barry Supple. Now, Barry, you've had a long connection with Cambridge in various ways, but we'll get onto that later because it took you some time to get to Cambridge. And I don't know when the beginning is, but I think the first question I want to ask you is that when you went to LSE in, I think, 1949,
That's right.
to be an undergraduate, were you already an economic historian?
Not quite, although perhaps I should have been. In fact, I registered to do an economics degree, but like so many people, found the mathematics rather off-putting.
Even then?
Even then. Well, the sort of statistical, excessively analytical, and I got attracted by economic history for its empirical and, I suppose, more cultural aspects, but also, with so many people, because of Jack Fisher.
Right.
That was the
Now,
influence.
did Jack Fisher give lectures in your first year?
He did. Funny lectures which verged on the scurrilous, of course.
Yes.
Jack being full of double entendre, but very, very interestingly. Yes, he did, and was very impressive. Yeah.
And so you felt immediately that sort of clever cynicism,
That's right.
knowledgeable cynicism,
Yes.
was much to your taste.
Yes. Well, it wasn't my exclusive taste, because I was also very impressed by T.S. Ashton, who
I was
lectured
actually
to
going to ask you about
undergraduates.
that. Yes.
Who, of course, was a very impressive man. I mean, very obviously a scholar, very obviously a distinguished person in his field,
not
but
a
also accessible.
Not a show-off like
Not
that.
a show. No, indeed. That's why I mention Ashton, because
Right.
he was a contrast. I mean, not perhaps even as much as Carus Wilson, who was an even greater contrast
Yes.
to Jack Fisher. But between them, the array of talent or the array of interest was very great. I mean, Fisher was very attractive, of course, to 18 and 19-year-olds because of his style and his jokes and his cynicism. But the others, if one had any pretensions to scholarship, were equally so. I should have said that I did have some acquaintance with economic history before, because I was one of the unusual group of people who was in a sixth economics, not a sixth arts. And so we took economic history for high school certificate, then version of A-level, as well as economics and economic geography. It was a
Right.
very...
And the sort of economics you did was institutional and related to the real world,
In
rather than mathematics.
In the A-levels, yes, that's right, yes.
This was A-levels already, was it? This is
Well, sorry, it was a high school
very,
certificate.
Very early A-levels.
No, they
it's
were high school
immediately-
certificate. They weren't still high school certificate. Yes.
Yes, but institutional economics that was about how people made their livings and related to life as you saw it in the East End.
Partly, there was theory. We used the Oxford Economic Handbooks, for example, on joint demand and joint supply and the demand curves and this sort of thing. Sort of basic, very elementary theory, if you like. But there was theory in it. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of institutional stuff.
Right. So at LSE you maintained some sort of interest in economics because you had to do papers in economics and government and various
That's
things.
right, I did.
You immediately were attracted to economic history in the way that you described.
Yes, after a term.
And you became then committed to being an economic historian.
I did. The degree, I should say, the degree was then called the New Regulations, which became the Old Regulations and now disappeared, of course, as you know. Yes.
I think that was what was called old regs in my day.
Yes, it was new regs in mine, and you took in 1 year a wide array of social science subjects.
Yes.
And in the first 2 years, and then in the final year you specialised. And at some point, I forget exactly when, I decided I would specialise in economic history rather than economics. But until the second year, it was the same foundation course.
Yes. And that was, I think, as things were more or less laid down by Sidney Webb. You think?
I can't remember what preceded it, but it was called the New Regulations in 1949, so presumably it was a post-war...
It was a change, a slight change, yes, I'd have to go into that.
Yes.
That was what was called old regs in my day, but what the big change between then and my day in the mid-60s was that we spent 1 year doing part 1 and 2 years specialising.
Yes, mine was a less specialised degree, yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
So when you graduated, you were a committed economic historian.
Yes.
And you decided to come to Cambridge to be a research student.
Well, I decided to apply for a scholarship and got one to Cambridge. I mean, it wasn't that Cambridge was inherently attractive. It was attractive, but it wasn't preeminently attractive. It was just there was an open a scholarship open to people who were not Cambridge graduates.
The scholarship was not just honorific. It actually meant money.
It meant money, yes. I forget what it was. It was probably £100, £150 a year. I mean, beyond.
But that was why you went to Christ's.
Yes, it was a Christ scholarship.
Because they had
it was an open scholarship, so called.
Did you fall under the influence of Jack Plum?
Oddly enough, yes, although not professionally, if you see what I mean. He was my tutor, which in Cambridge, as you know, simply means in loco parentis. He was not my supervisor, who was Charles Wilson.
Right.
But Jack Plum looked after graduate students in history. So I was quite close to him, and we got to know each other.
And he wasn't so difficult and eccentric as he became. I take he was in his prime then.
He was in his prime. He was as difficult. He wasn't as eccentric.
Right.
Yes. I mean, he was an angular sort of person, and very given to having strong likes and dislikes of people. So it wasn't always easy to accommodate yourself to him. But if you did, and I think we got on well, then he could be very rewarding. I mean, in those days, a Cambridge Don taught the whole tripos. He didn't teach specialised papers, so he taught right across the history field, and that was very impressive.
From Roman Britain
up to the 20th century, and he might teach politics and things of this sort.
He must have had his preferred periods.
Well, he did. I mean, it was the 17th, 18th century, really. Yes, he was then. I remember he wrote The Four Georges, the wonderful money-spinning book for him, in the sort of 6 weeks of the long vacation. He just settled down and wrote it. And he was an entertaining person. I mean, in a way, although quite different from Jack Fisher, an analogous attraction, because he was cynical and intellectual and given to quick snap judgments which were nevertheless penetrating, and a militant atheist. I mean, all the sort of things that would attract a 21-year-old, just as Jack had attracted an 18-year-old. Yes,
very good.
He would always refer to the chaplain as God botherer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, how did you find your way to Charles Wilson?
Well, he was allocated to me because of the subject that I'd chosen. I decided I wanted to work on trade fluctuations.
You had decided, or did Jack tell you that? Did Jack Fisher tell you that you should do that?
No, I had decided, although Jack had a great hand in refining it, because I was very much influenced by Jack Fisher's article on commercial fluctuations. What it's called?
Trends and Fluctuations.
Trends and Fluctuations, that's right. And so I wanted to push that forward to the early 17th century and do a sort of 100 years. And I wrote it up as a proposal for Cambridge. Jack's penetrating comment on it was that I read too much Hemingway. That was how he perceived this. And we sort of cut it down by half as well, because it was much too ambitious. But yes, it was something that I wanted to do, but very much influenced by Jack and his special subject, because I took Jack's special subject in the 16th century.
Right.
Yeah. And that was very interesting.
So this was your interest in commercial fluctuations carried into the, perhaps you might say, the post-Fisher period.
That's right, essentially so. Yeah.
And this obviously, this took you into the 17th century foreign trade, which was Charles Wilson.
That's right.
So that's how you found him. What did you find him like?
I found him like the bursar of Jesus. Because he was bursar of Jesus College. He was helpful. I got on very well, and we remained good friends. But I can't say that he was very loquaciously interested, loquaciously penetrating into what I was doing. And we did talk a lot about Jesus College finances when we met. And he was helpful. He was certainly helpful, but it was helpful in response to what I was doing rather than to what he took me with a bullseye lantern into the library of Jesus to show some old 18th century books which were on the wool trade, things like that, which were relevant.
Yes. We were talking to your slightly senior contemporary, Peter Mathias.
Yes.
And he was, of course, an undergraduate at Jesus and much influenced by Charles Wilson. He talked about Charles being bursar too, and said he learned a lot about agriculture. There seemed to be a lot of sort of farmers tramping through, and discussions of rates and farming problems, which is not something you normally think of Charles Wilson as having been.
No, you don't, but bursars in those days must have been. I happen to have been involved in the last few months trying to write the history of Christ College in the interwar period, which is a contributed volume, and it's clear there the governing body and the council to spend an awful lot of time talking about rents,
Right.
and particularly in wartime. Yes,
Right.
Yes. So that's a similar thing.
Yes.
Yes. Peter was a research fellow at Jesus when I was a postgraduate, because he was
Right.
just a couple of years ahead of me, I think.
Right. Right. But Charles Wilson's interests, am I right in supposing at this time, were moving away from the Anglo-Dutch commerce, which he'd done before the war, and I take it at this time he was very preoccupied with his history of Unilever,
Yes.
which I take to be more or less the beginnings of modern business history, in which you came to be interested too.
Yes.
Now you must owe that, in some measure, to Charles.
Well, I do. Actually, I know it in a huge measure. Charles had just published, or at some point in my 3 years as a postgraduate, published the history of Unilever, which was, as you say, the first
54,
substantial.
I think, the first
yes,
two
that's
volumes.
right. I was there 52 to 55. Charles' book on Unilever was the first major, authentic, scholarly British business history. As a result of that, he had been offered by the Harvard Business School the post of the successor to N.S.B. Grass, who was the pioneer business historian in America in the Harvard Business School. Charles declined this, and I think it was the case that they said, okay, well, do you know a younger scholar who might come to us? And he said, yes, I have a student called Barry Supple who might go. And that's how I went to America and got interested in business history, because I taught business history rather than economic history when I went to the Harvard Business School.
In 1955.
In 55, that's right.
So Charles Wilson plays a crucial
Absolutely,
a crucial
absolutely
part
vital.
in that.
Yes.
Now, how did you manage to finish your PhD in 3 years, which is something often aspired to? I believe Donald Coleman achieved it. Very few people did, and it wasn't as if yours was a small piece of work.
Yeah. Well, I've always assumed that lots of people did in those days. Perhaps you're telling me that you know they did. I assumed it. I didn't observe it. That it was, you just did it. But maybe that's how great things are achieved.
It was pretty rare.
It's rare now. My theory, which is obviously an erroneous theory because it's based on a false assumption that everybody did it then and nobody does it now. My theory has always been that it was easy then because you could skim the cream of records that had not been properly explored, and nowadays so much has been written that you have to work jolly hard to find something new. Well, I suppose I did work hard, really, but it was. You could do an enormous amount from the state records. So I didn't have to use a huge variety of records. The state papers domestic.
But printed state papers domestic.
Well, I also used the manuscript ones.
Right.
Behind the catalogues. And also from the port book. So the range of sources you need to use was limited because those that had not been used were so rich.
Right.
I mean, that was certainly true of my subject. So it wasn't quite as difficult, alas, as it seemed.
I don't know what the figures are, but I think very few people actually did finish in 3 years.
Yes.
And I would suppose that at that time, most people didn't finish at all.
Well,
especially in Cambridge, when I thought,
that's right, they just wafted on.
There was some sort of feeling that you didn't need to do it.
That's right, gentlemen didn't need a PhD,
yes.
That's right.
Yes.
I should say I finished it in less than 3 years, because I didn't start till I came up in the October of 52, and I started my job in America in the September of 55. So now that I come to think about it, it was even more.
It was less than 3 years.
Less than 3 years, yes.
Right.
But I think in Cambridge, yes, and it still has occasionally been the case that people go straight on once they get into a college post and don't need the PhD.
Yes.
I don't think Peter got it.
No, Peter never didn't bother to finish.
No, that's right.
He did produce rather a good book.
Oh yes, absolutely so. There was brewing, yeah.
So, in 1955, you went to the other Cambridge, Massachusetts, presumably in those days by sea.
No, 17 hours across the Atlantic by air, landing in Gander. Yes,
Gander.
With a propeller plane driving me forward.
Yeah. And you stayed at Harvard for 5 years, so presumably you liked it.
Well, I did. I liked it all the time. I didn't feel initially that I wanted to stay permanently, and I made the mistake of not applying for a immigrant visa when I could have done. I went there on what's called an exchange visitors visa, and that was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. While I was there, after a year or so, the law was changed in America to say that if you were on exchange visitors visa, you had to leave the country for 2 years if you wanted to come back. You come into it as an immigrant. But those of people like me who were already there were given this option. But I was going on holiday and I didn't think it was important, so I didn't take it up. When I came to feel that I wanted to stay by about 1957-8, it was too late. I had to leave. So that by the time I left, I wanted to stay, and by the time initially when I was staying, I wanted to leave. But, that's
Yes. Yeah. So did you have to leave because then you went to McGill?
Well, that was one. Yes, indeed. You see, I didn't want to leave, but I had to. I couldn't get. I wrote to her then. There was a way of avoiding this rather monetary legislation, which was to say that your presence in America was important to the welfare of America. So I wrote to an up-and-coming young senator called Jack Kennedy, who was then just senator for Massachusetts, in the hope that we could persuade him. And the business school supported me, but it was obviously nonsense. I mean, I wasn't a theoretical physicist or anything. So when a job came up in McGill, I thought, well, that's quite near America, and it's sort of interesting. It's North America. So I went there in 60.
But intellectually, America was important to you in all sorts of ways.
Oh,
I mean, there's technology and the gadgets and the openness of life and all that.
Yeah.
But in particular, you were at the business school.
That's right.
And you were actually teaching business history.
That's right.
And the type of students you had, were they doing MBAs?
Yes, they were all doing MBAs.
So they were all hands-on businessmen.
Absolutely. And many of them had been businessmen who were coming back for post-experience courses.
Right. Yeah. And you were yourself working on a completely different topic, dropping 17th century Britain, and you moved into 19th century railways and investors.
That's right.
In America, so you'd gone west.
West. That's right.
It was the new world.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Well, that's where the sources were. That's what people were talking about. It seemed an interesting thing.
And what happened to Grass? Did Grass die?
He retired when I got there and died. He had already retired, and then he died, I suppose, a year or two after.
And Gay had died.
Gay was dead, yes. A man called Arthur Cole was then the librarian of the business school and a very well-known animateur, sort of entrepreneur of economic history in America.
Oh.
Didn't write very much, but was very influential.
Did he write about French mercantilism?
No, that was another Cole.
Is that a different
there was a different Cole. There were two
right.
Coles, yeah. He didn't. Right. Arthur didn't write very much, but he supported a lot of people.
Right.
Sometimes out of his own pocket, but he certainly actively said.
So this was quite a different intellectual context from the LSE.
Absolutely,
from Cambridge.
yes.
But
yes.
drawing on your background in these places, you did this. Now, what did you teach or work on when you went to McGill?
I can't remember.
I don't believe you.
Well, when you say what did I work on, I suppose I was writing up some of the stuff that I had begun in America. In the United States, I was interested, as you say, in railroads and in Boston investors, but I was also interested in economic growth, because that was, you must recall, we're dealing now with the late 50s, when economic explorers had discovered economic growth. So I began work on a book which I subsequently published. It was edited, a collection of, because the experience of economic growth.
Yes, indeed.
And that I sort of worked on in McGill, and also it was in McGill that I wrote up with my co-author the book on railroads. With Arthur Johnson.
I notice now that's not published till 1967.
That's right. As late as that. Oh yes, that's his fault.
Oh.
It's my co-author's fault. Yes, yes. So the work that I'd done in the business school sort of rolled forward in terms of production.
Right.
And I was only in McGill for 2 years, because it takes almost a year simply to settle into a new
And then,
place.
did you decide you wanted to come back to Britain, or did you have a passion to be at a new university?
Yes.
Or what mix of feelings brought you back in 1962?
Well, it was a mix. I suppose what I used to say, I think it's true, that at that stage, as to some extent now, academics on the whole don't necessarily decide what country they'd like to be in, they decide what university they want to be in.
Oh.
I was invited down to MIT, which had a vacancy because Walt Rostow had gone off to help the Kennedy administration.
Yes. With
security
effects that we all remember.
Well, we do indeed, yes, and nobody more than the Vietnamese, of course. That didn't come off. No, I don't think Samuelson thought that I was hotshot enough as an economist, because it was in economics.
Right.
So nothing happened there, and while I was sort of twiddling my thumbs and thinking, Sussex opened, and my old friend, my friend, he wasn't my old friend then, I'm a friend of 3 years standing, Asa Briggs, who'd just gone to Sussex as Pro Vice Chancellor, said, why don't you come here for a job? Oddly enough, there's a story which very few people know. I accepted verbally, by letter, and then got a letter from Charles Wilson saying, what about this job? And I said, what do you mean, this job? And apparently there was a lectureship in Cambridge that he'd written to me about, and the letter had never got to me. One of these things that happened. And of course it was too late in any case. So I was attracted by the novelty of
Maurice Beresford claims there was a time when he tried to persuade you to come to the University of Leeds.
Yes, that was in 1958. In 1958, partway through my stay in Harvard Business School, and I got married. I met Sonia, who was English. We came back to England. She was then, by the time we got married early in January, we came back in August. She was, whatever it was, 8 months pregnant, and my father kept introducing us as fiancés, but that's another matter. We came back to England, and Asa Briggs was still in Leeds. He was Professor of Modern History, and there was a vacancy, and he asked me to come up, and I did in fact go up and had an interview, met people, and decided not to go.
Right.
So that's Maurice's.
Remember, I'm not sure that I understood the date of that. That was an earlier.
That was an earlier thing. Yes.
Okay, and so how did you get to know Asa Briggs?
He was a visiting scholar for a summer school in Harvard. And the impressive thing many impressive things about Asa, that the impressive thing I found was that I was then wanting to turn my thesis into a book to publish, but I was a bit uncertain about its organisation. He said, well, I'll read it for you. Bring it round for tea tomorrow, So I took it round to tea, and he said, oh, hello. He said, I'll take it upstairs, have a look. You have tea with Susan, his wife, which I did. An hour later he came down and had read it and had made terribly penetrating comments. I mean, it was awfully formidable. Knew about it all, we turned it round, So he was a great help in turning this. And we got quite friendly. We went on holiday together in the States, he and his family. And I, and so we knew each other ever since. And then he wrote to me when the University of Sussex was being started.
Just at the time when you were prepared to say yes.
Yes, when I knew I didn't want to stay in McGill. I suppose if McGill had been more attractive, it wasn't unattractive, but if I'd felt it was something I wanted to be at, then I wouldn't have thought of anything else. But this came up, and nothing was on offer in America, and characteristically of me, I precipitately decided to go, with the thing that was then on offer, and came back to Sussex. Before term started at Sussex, and while Sonia was yet again pregnant, this time with our third child, in the August, I got a letter from Ann Arbor, Michigan, University of Michigan, asking whether I'd like to go there. And I flew there in the summer and gave a couple of talks and was offered a job and accepted. And then got back to England and chickened out of this rather dramatic thing of going to another job before I'd assumed the job I was supposed to be in, and didn't in fact go then. That's right.
So you obviously went rejecting America.
Not at all, and never have done.
No.
Never have done. No.
Now this is 62.
Yes.
We're in, and is this the very first term of the University of Sussex?
Sussex. It isn't quite. Sussex started with 40 students and 7 or 10 faculty members in 1961.
61.
It would have been 62. Would have been the first term, but there was so much pressure on places that they decided to expedite the opening of the university, and opened in rented accommodation in Brighton.
In Brighton.
Yeah, before the campus.
And all the campus at Falmer wasn't there. Or
not in 61.
You saw it being built.
Well, it was when I got there. It was built. We were in not Nissen huts, temporary huts, which remained some time. And there was one brick building, and the scientists, of course, looked after themselves very well. They had their laboratories already.
Yes.
And there was a central social building, Falmer House.
Yeah.
And the arts and social sciences were in these huts.
Yeah.
And that was in 62. Yeah.
Now, we don't hear much about the University of Sussex these days. Perhaps since you and Asa left. But in those days, we heard a lot about it.
Absolutely, yes.
It was And I don't think we'd ever heard of Warwick University, which we hear about now. It's a rather strange shifts in at least images and impressions. Yes. Well, I take it that this reputation that Sussex got of being the most dynamic, intellectually new place was substantially deserved in yes. the 60s, if not 70s too. Mm.
Oh, it certainly was. I suppose what happened over the longer run was that the things for which it established its reputation didn't embed themselves as deeply in British academic life as we thought they were going to, namely interdisciplinary studies, redrawing the map of learning, as Aza put it, not having specialisation. We didn't have departments. You weren't cheek by jowl with other historians. You were a historian in my case, the School of Social Sciences, so you were next door to geographers and economists and so forth. Students took a sort of basic course, contextual course as they were called, which were school courses, and only gradually specialised. Now that sort of adventurous thing, and the courses were novel as well. You taught courses like Contemporary Britain or the European Mind and things of this sort. And those things, which were very exciting then, it was thought, this is the new wave, ceased to be quite as telling. I suspect that it's fair to say that the forces of traditional among academics reimpose themselves. I think schools have just been abandoned or something like it.
There's been a reassertion of department.
That's right. That reasserted itself, but also, to be fair to those people who reasserted themselves, I suppose that since it wasn't a revolution, it wasn't a national revolution, they had to operate in a national sphere where departments and specialisms were still important. I mean, that's how careers were shaped. And as a friend of mine once said there, or as I was quoting the Chinese, it is no accident that departments exist. I mean, they're not really bourgeois impositions upon intellectual life. They'll have a logic. And it wasn't possible to contravene that logic too dramatically. I suppose that would be the fair middle ground. And so that thing changed. And whereas in the 60s we used to interview students for admission, and we'd say, why do you want to come? And they'd give us the gospel. They knew all about schools and interdisciplinary studies and redrawing the map of learning. By the late 70s, when we said, do you have any questions? They said, yes, is there anything special about Sussex? I mean, they weren't, it was another university. Yes. And the same applied to the faculty. I think it is true that the first pioneering members of the first pioneering generation were all pioneers. Were all
lively, committed.
That's right. But then later on they came, it was a job. I mean, it was an interesting job. It was an academic job, but it was a job like going to Manchester or Liverpool. Yes. So they really weren't behind the dream, if you like.
And what did you actually mainly teach there? Did you teach comparative development and economic growth?
No, I didn't.
Or did you teach British economic history?
I taught conventional British economic history. I taught 2 or 3 of these contextual courses. I taught the Contemporary Britain course, Social Issues in Contemporary Britain, I suppose it ought to be called. And I also taught a course with a very bright English lecturer, who I know very well still, called Larry Lerner, on, it was called The Industrial Revolution and the English Literary Imagination. So it was a joint course with an English professor, or an English reader as the name was, in Dickens and George Eliot and Bronte's and Trollope, in the context of the history. And so we studied it differently.
So you'd moved on yet again, and you weren't teaching business history, no trace of MBAs, case studies of entrepreneurs and all that?
No. I did teach some American history, but that was faute de mieux because there weren't other people around. I taught a special subject in FDR, Roosevelt, but that was only until somebody else could come in. Everybody was a journeyman, a utility player in Sussex in those days.
Right.
Yes. I also taught the art science course. We had an art science seminar to bridge the gap between the science students and the art students. Yes. Yeah. So it was a. But I got in. Oddly enough, I got into business history more when I was in Sussex by being commissioned to write the Royal Exchange Assurance history of Royal Exchange Assurance than I had done in America, where the number of approaches I had, but nothing ever came of it to write company history.
Right. So your research was on a different field to your teaching.
Yeah.
For a key time.
It was.
Yeah.
I refined and finally published the Experience of Economic Growth book. I did edit a book for the Economic History Society on business history, studies in business history,
Yeah.
with an introduction. That was, of course, other people's work mostly. But yes, the business history was different from what I didn't teach business history at all.
Right.
The Royal Exchange Insurance then preoccupied most of my research for 4 years or so, and it was published in 1970.
When you now we're getting towards Oxford, and there's yet a further change in your.
Could I just interrupt there,
Surely.
to say that I also went back to America in '64 to teach summer school at Harvard by invitation. And while I was there, I was invited to take up a post in Berkeley.
Oh.
And I flew to Berkeley, and that was very exciting. And I'd actually gone back to America with an immigrant visa. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. We all had it. So I would have been ready to go. And I was on...
64. So who was at Berkeley in 64? It was David Landers still?
Well, this is the part of the story. David Landers and Henry Rozovsky were the two leading lights.
They were just leaving.
David was just leaving. When I got there, I knew David quite well from my time at Harvard earlier, where he'd been. He was just leaving to go to Harvard, prestigious man. Henry Rozovsky, who subsequently became dean at Harvard and was a Russian economic historian, he was my mentor, my intermediary. And I flew back to Boston, where I was based for the summer school in Harvard, thinking, yes, this is very attractive, it's sort of idyllic, when Henry phoned me and said, I'm awfully sorry, I can't advise you to accept this job now, because we are becoming like the University of Saigon. Now, the inwardness of that was that it was the free speech movement. It was the beginning of the student revolution, which happened in September or whatever it was, 1964. And Berkeley was in turmoil.
Yes.
And Henry said, it's like the University of Saigon, which was itself a time.
Yes. This was tear gas.
Yes,
Sproul
that's
Plaza.
right, police and beating up. And he said, I'm leaving. I'm coming to Harvard as well, so don't come. And, well, not quite screwed is that. And that did put me off. So I didn't.
So you nearly went even further west.
Absolutely, yes. And it really went so far west that Gerschenkron, who was my great friend in the Harvard area, once said, don't go to Berkeley, Larry. You'll spend the rest of your days playing chess and looking at the Pacific. It's a sort of lotus-eating life, which I'm sure he was right about, which is partly why I miss it. Anyway, so I just want to say there was that interlude while I was still at Sussex, where I was still tempted, but didn't quite come through on the temptation.
Right.
Yes.
No, because obviously you like new experiences and doing something different.
Doing something different and getting back to America.
The theme of your life.
Two of my children are joint dual citizens, and America's always been very close, and I go there, or have gone there frequently. Yeah.
Let me sort of step back a little and ask you a slightly broader question. When you were becoming an economic historian around the middle of the last century, were you conscious that you were, I'm not sure what the right surfing term is, joining a breaker? Were you conscious that you were joining a subject that was really to boom through the 50s and 60s and 70s? And by the time you get to Oxford, the position is different, and I'll ask you about that.
Yeah.
There's a sort of a quarter of a century or more of growth, however measured, quantitatively, and behind that a sort of intellectual growth of an important subject. At what point were you conscious that by chance you joined this sort of major success story?
I think only when I went to America. I think the initial stages of my education in economic history were rather like us being on a moving staircase. I mean, it was just happening. That's why I made the point about being in the sixth economics. I did economic history. It was the most attractive of the three economic type subjects I took. It was sort of cosy, it was satisfying, it was somehow good. It was reinforced by the 16th century, Fisher saying this is real history, you don't mislead yourself into believing you understand it, but it's very good. And so it was just a personal attraction then. But when I got to America, where there were active and virile seminars in it, and when cliometrics were starting, although I was never adept enough at those techniques of the new economic history. But it was clearly exciting. It was at the frontier of something or other, and it overlapped with economic growth. And the book that I edited on the experience of economic growth is sort of symbolic of that. Although it isn't a wonderful book, it's an attempt to bridge the gap between economic history and the understanding of what was happening. Yeah. And in those days, we thought you could answer the questions about economic growth quite easily. Just look at history, and that was why Gerschenkram was very interesting too, because he was writing these wonderful books on backwardness and things like that. So at that stage, it seemed one was not part of the breaker. That's true. And I thought coming back to England, I would be a pioneer. I would educate these benighted Englishmen into this. It didn't work out like that.
Okay, so you enjoyed Sussex. Sussex was very exciting, and then you wanted to change. So in '78 you went to Oxford.
Let me give you another personal insight into that, though, because in '71, David Jocelyn, a young and temporary professor here, I mean temporary because he died quite young. I'd known David when I was a graduate student because he too was a research fellow. I was at one point the only person in his lecture.
Oh, really?
Yes, but that's another matter.
Was he obliged to give it to an audience of one?
Well, no, I probably exaggerate. There might have been 2 or 3 there, but I was certainly so much alone that he took me back and gave me a drink and things like this. However, he died, and the chair fell vacant.
Yes.
And I applied, and Charles Wilson was very encouraging. And then I got slightly cold feet because our children were at the stage, '78, they were sort of in school coming up to secondary school. We were very comfortable. My wife was a bit reluctant to have the upheaval. Cambridge seemed to some extent to close well. When we got back in '58, admittedly some years before, all Cambridge had talked about was how difficult things were in Cambridge. So at the very last minute I withdrew. I withdrew the day before the committee met. Who knows whether I would have got it. Charles Wilson thought I would, but that's the way he feels. And that was, of course, the post that Donald Coleman got. Right. That's when Donald Coleman was elected. Right. So I almost came to Cambridge in '71, and then for 7 years I looked back and regretted that I hadn't stayed in the competition.
Right. See? Because this wasn't for reasons of your own, this was for reasons of your family.
Yes, my perception.
I mean, not your own intellectual.
Not my own intellect. No, that's certainly true.
Yes,
that's true.
Yes.
So when in '78 the Oxford readership fell vacant because Max Hartwell had moved into the Socio-Legal Studies Centre.
Yes.
That seemed very attractive. So I then applied.
And your children were a bit old, and so there wasn't the same.
Yes, the children.
Well, I'm glad you didn't get it because Donald Coleman enjoyed it so much, at least until the end.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. And I continued to enjoy his college.
Yes.
Even if he didn't enjoy.
Right. Yes, it was Pareto optimal, as the economist said.
Yes.
Everybody was a bit better.
So you went to Nuffield. Now you enjoyed yourself, as far as I remember, enormously in Nuffield.
Oh, Nuffield was wonderful.
This was the time when I used to come and see you 4 times a year.
For the economic history.
Because we had the economic history review meetings. And there were, to me, it was a heroic time because you and Michael Thompson, I knew Michael Thompson pretty well, of course, better, I suppose, than I knew you at the time.
Yes, indeed.
Because I was Michael's successor, of course, at UCL. And I'd gone to some lectures of his. Anyway, we were colleagues and friends. Of course, he was brilliant, in fact. He used to pretend he wasn't. But it was remarkable to see how between you could spot the flaws in arguments and you could see that columns of figures didn't add up to what they were supposed to and so on. And they were very good fun.
They were fun, and I enjoyed that part of my academic life was very, very enjoyable. Both the review, but also Nuffield, which is very congenial. I mean, there's a story attached to that as to how I finally reluctantly decided to come to Cambridge, because Nuffield was so congenial, so nice, that there didn't seem to be much point in coming to a professorship in Cambridge, because the readership in Nuffield was just as attractive, it seemed. And I had a lot of heartburn deciding whether to apply or not for the Cambridge professorship.
Now, Donald, of course, took early retirement before early retirement had, as it were, been invented.
That's right.
Or became normal.
Yes.
So, of course, you can't have expected that, as it were, the chair would have become vacant so.
No, it was
so
an
quickly.
unexpected plum. Yes.
So, I mean, David dying was unexpected.
Yes.
Donald retiring was unexpected.
That's right. That's right. John retiring was quite unexpected, and I once asked him about that. I think he just got fed up with teaching undergraduates.
He more or less said that.
Yes, he did. He did. And I went to talk. This fell vacant. I was in two minds. I mean, on the one hand, Nuffield was very attractive. They pay their fellows very well, so that I was earning no less than I would have earned at Cambridge. It was an excellent library. It was like a research institute in the social sciences because it only had graduate students, a few graduate students, and who were very accomplished. It was near the station. We walked it quite easily. I didn't have undergraduate teaching, which I think is irrelevant. And altogether, it was very nice. And I spoke at length with two people. I spoke with Peter Mathias, at one point, and he was all for my applying. I remember he did say, and since this is not going to be divulged till the centenary, he did say it's very good, and there are some very good plums you can pick up, like the headship of a college. And since both of us ended up as heads of college, that was really quite pertinent. I also spoke with Shelley Halsey, who I got to know quite well, the sociologist, A.H. Halsey, I got to know quite well at Nuffield. And both of them, I suppose, were saying go for it, or whatever is the right phrase. I think the thing that persuaded me in the end to apply, and I'm not being unusually modest, I mean, I really did feel that I was as well off, intellectually well off, in Nuffield. The thing that persuaded me was the sort of thought experiment. I put myself on my deathbed, and somebody said to me on my deathbed, you mean you had the opportunity of going to the senior professorship of economic history of the country and you turned it down? And then I thought, no, I wouldn't. I'd have to do it if I could.
Right.
So I applied. That's right. Yes.
And you got it. You enjoyed it.
Yes. I got it and I enjoyed it. I received a postcard of congratulations. No, that was in Oxford. I should tell you this because it's an important insight in the British Academic Life. When I got the readership in Oxford, I got a postcard congratulating me from somebody before I knew I'd got it. The rumour mill worked so well in Oxford that a first-class postcard got to me before the registrar phoned me. In Cambridge, it was Peter Mathias who phoned me because he was the external on the board. So
right.
so I got it and I went. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
And of course, you became Master of St Catherine's, and you enjoyed that too.
I went back to Christ, I should say, my old college, before I was elected.
Yes, I remember.
Yes.
Yeah. And eventually you allowed yourself to be tempted away to run the Leverhulme Foundation, which I may or may not ask you about. Leverhulme Trust.
Yeah.
Terribly sorry.
That's right.
Later. Now, in the 80s, economic history was evidently, at least in some senses, in decline.
Yes.
Certainly the most obvious quantitative indicators, we can see that graph that Georgia and I produced of numbers of the members of the society declining every year after 77.
Yes.
And I forget the figures for O and A level, but we've got those figures. And of course, student demand really did begin to fall off dramatically in the 80s. And a lot of the separate departments that had been founded as economic history expanded in the 50s and 60s and 70s were in a difficult position, and virtually all of them were, of course, amalgamated, usually into history or collapsed.
That's right.
Now, you kept away from that because, of course, America and Sussex and Oxford and Cambridge never had those separate departments. Right. I take it you think those separate departments were not necessarily a good thing.
Well, yes and no, as we say. There was a sense in which I missed a separate department because the professional give and take of a specialised department it can be quite attractive, and I found it quite happy to be in a university setting where I wasn't solely among economic historians. That's certainly true.
Right.
But I never thought it was a bad thing to have that in certain sectors. I mean, I always did admire LSE or Leicester or Glasgow or these places which had quite, Edinburgh perhaps more particularly, which had virile economic history departments. I should say that in a peculiar way, although Oxford didn't have an economic history department, and I did a lot of teaching of a sort of quasi-straight history sort. When it came to fighting their corner for a graduate population in economic history, Oxford were far more active and successful than I was in Cambridge. I mean, with Charles Feinstein and ultimately Avner Offer and so forth, rejigging the curriculum, having proper master's courses, attracting people and so forth, that was quite important. The same didn't happen at Cambridge, I think in part because we were more embedded in Cambridge in the history faculty, where we were diffused a bit more. In fact, a lot of my time was spent simply rescuing the separate existence of the paper in economic and social history. There was a point at which the seamless web argument came up. History is a seamless web, why do you have papers in economic history, even for historians, so to speak. But we defended that. But we were more diluted, if you like, and Oxford not, because they were in economics and politics, and we were in history.
Long tradition in Cambridge of economic history having a prominent position in the history tripos.
Yes.
And I think for many years it was a compulsory paper.
Is
it still?
It was, well, it was when I left. I can't answer to what my successor, because I haven't kept up. No, it is still.
So demand was kept up by it being a compulsory
yes,
paper.
That's right.
So
all first year students had to.
They were doing history. Yes.
It's part one. Yeah, that's right.
No, well, I think that's a particularly, I don't know about unique, but a particularly distinctive feature of Cambridge, because I don't think economic history was always required of everybody taking history degrees. We'd be in a much better state if this Cambridge practice had applied everywhere else.
Yes, it was compulsory in new regulations, what you called old regulations at LSE when I was a lad, when in that.
Well, it no longer is.
No, I know
the present regulations at LSE.
Yes,
no, the whole Sidney Webbian concept of having to do all the social sciences at least to some extent before you specialise has gone.
Yes.
They don't have that, I suppose.
The obligatoriness in Cambridge, I think, was simply because of the formidable character of the people who were involved in it from the beginning. I mean, Marshall was, although an economist, of course, was committed to economic history, but Clapham was the great sort of Panjam.
Yes.
He was really prominent and made it so.
I didn't ask
and Poston, we didn't talk about Poston. But
I was just going to say I didn't ask you about Poston.
Yes.
Should I ask you about Poston?
Well, you probably should, although I think you've heard it before from me. I didn't have much direct contact with him when I was a graduate student, although I attended his seminar regularly and got to know him quite well, but of course it wasn't his field. He was very favourably inclined towards everybody, I suppose, but towards me. He was a help. And I used to see him when he visited America when I was there. And I think I once said to you that once I was well established in academic life, he would invariably introduce me as one of my students, which I never was, of course, but that was very Poston-esque. So yes, I knew him quite well. And when I came back to Cambridge as professor and went to see him and had a meal with him, he was actually rather touching, because he said, I want to tell you something very important, and that is that it's critical that you establish a bridge between history and economics, which you, institutionally you do, because the professor of economic history is ex officio a member of the economics faculty board, although embedded in history. And Poston obviously cared deeply that this bridge should continue.
Well, I can see that's important in Cambridge terms. That's the important duty of the professor.
Yes.
Because there is this strange Cambridge distinction between economic history and economic history.
Yes, absolutely.
We were, after all, earlier today talking firstly to Peter Mathias, who for many years gave lectures on economic history to historians, and then to Phyllis Dean, who for many years gave lectures on economic history to economists.
I was never able to exchange even a list of topics with my opposite numbers in economics. It was a gulf between us, even though we were amicably related.
Well, Phyllis Dean says, of course, you're all perfectly good friends, and she thought there was no intellectual divide. But she did go on to say she's recently given away all her copies of the Economic Journal, because she said it's many years since there's been anything in it.
That's right, yes. But you see, I once tried to conjoin the lectures. They were on the same subject. There was no reason why there should have been two separate, but nobody would have it.
Yes. Why do you think that the numbers of students wanting to study economic history began to decline so strongly in the late 70s and through the 80s, and indeed through the 90s?
Yes. Well, I only really have cliché answers to that, I suppose, but still, clichés are always useful. I mean, I think, for one thing, students were put off by the thought that it was a difficult subject. It had economic analysis in it. I think even British economic historians began to be a bit more interested in semi-hard theory, if you like, if they were economic historians, and tended therefore to go more for the social cultural end of things. So that pure or traditional or good old-fashioned economic history was no longer as attractive to undergraduates, certainly as a specialism, and even in terms of an optional paper, because it had, you had to understand demand and supply and things of this sort, a bit of Keynesian and macroeconomics. And I think that, I'm too young to say it was dumbing down, but one has a feeling that there were certain things people were tuning themselves to. But also I think that aspects of history became more sexy. And the cultural, social history,
gender history,
gender things, standard living at some general sense, things of this sort, and also the specialisation, of course. But that didn't affect degrees. I mean, labour history, transport history, urban history, rural history. But that's not an answer, because that people didn't take degrees in those much anyway. But yes, I think the other sorts of history. And who knows? I mean, that's an important argument in favour of saying that is also Greek history.
When I interviewed Rothgar Habakkuk, he said, I think pretty explicitly, that when he gave up being Professor of Economic History in Oxford and became Principal of Jesus, he was more or less giving up economic history because it had become a different thing to what it was.
He has said that.
And I mentioned this to Peter Mathias earlier today, and he more or less agreed and said, well, that was part of the reason why he gave up being Professor of Economic History in Oxford. Now, is it part of the explanation for why you gave up being Professor of Economic History in Cambridge? That the subject was different to what you perceived it was when you joined it?
No, not quite. Incidentally, I didn't give up economic history to become Master of St. Catherine's.
No,
I gave it up when I went to the Leverhulme Trust. No, I gave it up because like Don Coleman, I got a bit fatigued at the. I stopped in '93. I'd been teaching since '55. There's a limit. I didn't enjoy lecturing quite as much as I might have done in a university where the supervisions, it's very much a market system in Cambridge to lecture. I mean, unless you can attract a lot of people, you don't attract anybody. I mean, there's no reason why you should go to lectures, given the fact they have supervisions. So it was always a bit of a battle to keep going, and it was the same thing coming up year after year. I'd always wanted to be a bit of a patron as well and have disposition of funds, and that's what you had. I don't think I would have left the professorship for any old foundation, but the Leverhulme Trust, disposing ultimately under my directorship of £27 million a year, perhaps the premier academic foundation, without respect to subject matter, in Britain. I mean, the biggest is obviously the Wellcome, but that's much bigger and specialised. I mean, these things are very attractive. I think it was autonomy that I was after, the being my own boss. Things were just beginning to get difficult in British university life with assessment, appraisals, research assessment exercise, this sort of thing. And I was able, if you like, to get out from under. And the other thing was, I of course found it difficult to be an economic historian fully while I was also trying to be master of a college. I mean, in Cambridge you do both, and you do neither particularly well if you care about both. Unless you neglect one fully, you can't do both adequately. Right. You can't do either adequately. So it just came at a good time in life. I'd always thought, just frankly, that heading up an institute like Leverhulme or perhaps Nuffield was a rather attractive thing. Yeah. I mean, I quite like administration. I've done a lot of it at Sussex.
Indeed you have.
Yes.
But you're now back to being an economic historian.
Yes, I am.
Because you're now a scholar.
That's right.
Again.
Yes, right. A self-employed scholar. Yeah, I am. I have a contract which I'm not conforming to very closely to write a volume for the Penguin New Economic History of Britain. I can't say that I have a great hunger to do a lot more archival research, because that's a different sort of animal, particularly where I am. I don't know who that is. Can you just switch it off
do we want to break off while you sort out 2002? And I'm still talking to Barry Supple in Cambridge. Did we finish what we were just
Well, you
saying?
asked me about the fact that you commented on the fact that I've become an economic historian again, and that's true. But although I am interested in, determined to try to get back to it. As you probably know, my wife has been unwell, so for some months now I haven't really been able to do very much. And I have to say that it's impossible to escape the clutches of the foundation and trust world. And I've taken on a part-time working from home position, advising a new foundation on giving away money. And interesting enough, given what you've said about economic history, the most active work I've done in the last few months is my contribution to a history of Christ College, 500th anniversary history, and I'm doing the period between 1914 and 1950.
Well,
so it is sort of social, cultural, economic history. Again, it goes back to the question of specialisation or not. I start with the economics, but go on to how the college reacts.
Well, no, your interests have moved on. You've moved to different places, but we talked about you just briefly. We talked about you being editor of the Economic History Review for really quite a crucial time in the subject's development, and you were later president of it. And I think the first time I met you was when I came to the first economic history conference I went to was at Brighton in 1965.
Absolutely.
And I think you were the organiser.
I was.
And it was an amazing experience because I was still an undergraduate. Peter Mathias incidentally told me this morning that he went to the famous Oxford conference in 1951,
oh, really, yes.
just before he graduated.
Really, yes.
And this was the first residential conference where they all froze,
Yeah.
organised by Michael Thompson.
Yes, yes.
Now, you've been a very regular attender over the years at those conferences. I haven't looked up how many people went to Sussex in 65.
Well, I can tell you. Because Sussex was the first time that more than 100 people attended the Economic History Society conference. And it was so successful, and that itself was so successful, that we actually made a significant profit. And that money, we had to decide what to do with the money, and that's what became the Tawney Lecture. We put the money aside to subsidise Tawney lecturers, at least as I remember it.
Right. No, that's an important thing to remember. Yes. It went more than 165.
That's right. Yes, it was the first time it got to more than 100.
And we could look up the figures attending conferences. We must count people going to conferences because that's quite a key thing.
It is.
Actually, it hasn't fallen as much as the membership has fallen.
No.
The first conference that had more than 250 was the Jubilee Conference held here in 76. 76, I think. Was it 75? Oh, I've got it here. Of course
77?
76.
76. Yes, I came up for that.
It was held at Churchill College. Is that part of Cambridge?
Yes, yes. And I came up from Sussex to attend it. Yes.
But I suppose even with it being over 100 people, most of the people you would have known.
Yes, I have to stop you there because my wife has just rung the bell.
Well, we're starting again, and we were talking about conferences. I've just forgotten exactly what.
Well, I made the point about the Sussex one being the 100, you
exactly.
250 at the Jubilee one.
Yeah.
And the fact that conferences have held up better than membership.
Quantitatively.
Yes.
But I think, would I not be right in also saying intellectually? Because they remain, they don't remain, I mean demographically they're not of a dying subject. Of old people discussing what they used to discuss 20 years ago. They are very lively, there's lots of young people, and they would be one of the, as it were, the quantitative indicators against the normal decline argument.
Yes.
And I think the range of things that are discussed is perhaps broader than it used to be.
Absolutely, yes, and I think it has. The conferences have adapted very well to the evolution both of the subject matter and the surrounding sea of a related subject matter, the social and cultural, so to speak, have been partly there. And of course the society itself has made a great play for its social and economic and social history. But I think the conferences have become much more interesting and more varied. And of course that's partly reflected in the growth of parallel sessions rather than plenary sessions, which used to dominate it. I remember when Poston used to argue that the president, when he was president, the president had to be in the chair for every session. And this was scouted as a theory, and quite rightly so. Yes. But certainly it now become, a much more varied and multicoloured event. and that has attracted people, and many more many more students now come. I think you must have been rare in coming as an undergraduate in.
Yes,
in
I don't have any
65.
undergraduates come, but a lot of graduate students come.
Now, yes, yes,
graduate
but
students
not.
come in
I mean, I went
substantial
as a
numbers.
graduate student when I was at Cambridge, and it came to Cambridge, but there weren't many graduate students there. You had to be a bit exceptional.
Yes. So that the society, in your view, is in a healthy state,
I think so.
Despite the various
Yes.
other indications of a supposed
Yes, and
decline.
it runs an attractive event. I think people do want to go. And
Yeah.
things. I always used to be very concerned and indeed upset that Charles Wilson very rarely went. I like Charles, and he was a great figure and an important person and very affable. But for some reason or other, once he was well established academically, he very rarely went to a conference. I always remember that, which is one reason I go as conscientiously as I can now to conferences, even after I retire. The feeling, I think, that the older established generation have a duty of care, if you like, to sustain.
I don't know why he didn't go. He
No.
must have gone when he was editor in the 60s.
Yes.
But I must say, I don't recall him. I don't think it was he at Brighton.
No.
I did
He
get.
very
He was
rarely
very
went.
good value at conferences.
Oh,
because
he was always very
he was
good,
a-
yes.
A splendid raconteur.
And wonderful mimic, yes.
And a wonderful mimic.
Yes,
Exactly.
but he didn't go much, whereas people like Poston do. But I was always disappointed in that. I mean, I felt close to it because he was my supervisor. Yeah.
Yes.
I even felt close to it after he published articles which appear to mirror quite closely my thesis.
Oh, really?
Without attribution.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I think we talked about Jack Fisher
Yes.
and various people at LSE. We talked about T.S. Ashton, but did we talk about R.H. Tawney?
We didn't really, no. Tony had retired by the time I got to LSE, but was still very much a presence. He gave a series of lectures on the early 17th century, which partly were transmuted into his book on Lionel Cranfield, but went much beyond it. But were not really published. It reminded everybody of that story with some of the greatest unpublished books of the 20th century on economic history are manuscripts on Tawney's desk. He was slow to do it, like Fisher, I suppose. So I went to his lectures then. I mean, that series of lectures, and I went to see him to talk about my thesis proposal. And he was quite. No, I went to see him about the thesis once I was at Cambridge. I went back. And also I used to go to some seminars that he gave, but he wasn't doddery, but he was getting older then. He was much less vigorous than presumably once he had been, but still, one sensed this personality, and also Jack Fisher's combination of admiration, respect, and cynicism about Tawney and his morality, really, I suppose. Yes.
Yes.
I remember an undergraduate friend of mine, who was a mature undergraduate, once saying that if two people, Tawney and Fisher, had been walking down the road and seen a bishop burning at the stake, Tawney would have gone over and tried to do something, and Jack would have taken the pipe out of his mouth and said how ridiculous this all was, and walked round the stake and on. Probably unfairly, but of course they were close to each other. I mean, Jack and Tawney.
Yes.
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 Just as Jack had been very close to J.U. Neff, the historian of the coal industry. Which I came to know about because I worked in the coal industry.
Yes. Jack, I think, worked as a research assistant.
He did,
for
and
a
never
time,
wanted to see a bit of coal again.
Claimed that he saved Neff from many elementary failures. Did you know Neff?
No, I didn't. He was
did
still
live
alive.
on a long time.
Yeah, he's still alive when I went to the States. but
A
he was in
terrible thing
Chicago.
happened to Neff, I understand. He married a rich woman.
Oh yes, yeah.
He was never heard of again.
Yes.
He became a Washington hostess. Well, no, that can't be quite right. His wife became a Washington hostess.
One of Jack Plum's nicest stories was about an English equivalent, which was E.P. Thompson, who married a rich woman, although he kept writing.
Oh, did he? Was Dorothy Thompson rich?
Was it E.P. Thompson? Was it Dorothy Thompson?
Dorothy Thompson
Yeah.
was married to Edward Thompson.
Well, then it must have been because they had a manor house. This was Jack Plum's
Oh, they
story.
did. Oh, well, they were rich.
Yes.
He was rich.
Yeah.
He went to a public school, and so no, I think
Oh,
the family
he
was
was
rich.
rich. Anyway.
Well, I don't know about Dorothy.
No,
Yes, no,
okay,
they
well, he
lived
was
in
rich.
great style.
Yes, the Plum's story was that when you went to a conference or meeting at E.P. Thompson's sort of radical manor house, he would say things like, "Take your rucksack, sir," and things like that. Yes, yes. Yes, no, it was E.P. You're right. It was E.P. Thompson's money. However, I never met Neff really.
Yeah. I have to say, I don't remember. I remember once Jack talking about him. I don't remember talking about him a lot.
About Neff.
About Neff.
Yes.
Neff was very quick and made lots of mistakes.
Yes.
Jack saved him from.
Yes, but I also think Jack found it was a grind, which it obviously was a grind to work like that.
But you didn't write about coal in that period at all, did you?
No. I wrote about it in the 20th century.
Goodness, I didn't realise we were going to be talking about coal. My understanding of Hatcher's basic conclusion in his volume in your series is that Neff was basically right.
Yes.
And that was unfairly criticised by Donald Coleman.
That's right, yes.
Because I think Hatcher's counting coal is an absolute nightmare. I don't know how you managed still to be alive. But the figures he produced show that Neff's statistics are more or less
stood up. Yes,
more or less on the right line.
Yes, no, John did a very good thing. No, I was much later. I did the 20th century. So that was another example. Since you were kind enough to be interested in a variety of my experiences, and my taking on the coloration of whatever was on offer. I mean, the possibility of the book came out. Peter Mathias actually invited me. He was on the advisory committee for the then National Coal Board, and they wanted an author for that, and asked me to do it. So I became interested in coal, just as I'd become interested in the Royal Exchange Insurance, because of the Royal Exchange Insurance, and business history because I went there, and railroads because there were archives in the Harvard Business School library, things like that.
Yes.
But that's never struck me as a despicable way of
No, but it's you evidently like new challenges and doing new things.
That's right.
That's obviously quite a theme.
Yes.
I don't know if the time has come for me to turn to Giorgio to see if he wants to ask you a question.
Well, yes. What is, in your opinion, the relationship between business history and economic history? Because there are quite a few people who work in both fields.
Yes. Well, I'm much more of an economic historian's business history, or a business historian's economic historian. That is, I got to business history from a basis in economic history. It always struck me as something that ought to be treated not as a series of company biographies, but as a series of problems in economic activity, economic transition, where a particular sort of institution, the business, the company, manifested itself. So I think there is a very close relationship, but it's a close relationship which is best exemplified through business histories which have a large element of economic, I'd say analysis, economic history, economic development in them. So that when I did the Royal Exchange Assurance, I was interested in the Industrial Revolution, in the nature of the textile trade, which produced the need for insurance and life insurance, and indeed the social aspects of life insurance, not simply in what I think I once called, actually in a review of Donald Coleman's book on Courtaulds, not simply the view from the bridge, the captain of the ship, that really one had to be general. So I think that in America it's gone the other way heavily. The company historians write biographies of companies, business historians write biographies of companies, and have developed a whole battery of conceptual analysis, which are no doubt perfectly legitimate, which is much more business managerial orientated than economic historical orientated. Mm-hmm. So I think, and that I think probably does distinguish British from American business history. I think British business historians are more economists who have adapted over, and American business historians tend to be people who are related to business schools, as indeed I was. But the thing I wrote on railroads, which is a sort of business history, is really a history of how investors act in an expanding economy. Just the same as the coal industry was very much an economic history of the coal industry, not only of the business units that comprise the coal industry.
Mm. Yeah. Well, doubtless there's many other things that we could argue about and talk about. I don't know if there's anything else that you think that we should have asked you about, with reference to any aspect of economic history or in its institutional or its intellectual forms.
I don't think so. I mean, I think there are a lot of aspects of economic history that I could have wished I had more time, inclination, even expertise to pursue. I think I was sorry that, in a way, my own training and taste didn't enable me to get deeper into the new economic history. Not that I wanted to become a clear metric historian, but certainly in the times in which I operated in the United States, it was a handicap not to have had a proper grounding in econometrics and statistics, and which I think are in principle possible to have while not abandoning conventional economic history. In principle not, but in practice of course very difficult. And I think one of the distinctions between the subject in Britain and the subject in America is this divergence, where the Americans on the whole have tend to have had a more systematic training in economic analytical techniques than their British counterparts, and use it. I was thinking in one of the introductions we had that, thinking back to my own career, oddly enough, I know a lot of the now mature generation of American economic historians, people like Paul David and Peter Temin and Donald, not Deirdre, McCloskey and people of this sort, and David Landers and Henry Zosky. Almost by the accident of having been around in the late 50s in Harvard when they all converged and then split out, mostly via Gershon Krohn's seminar. And they did go on to become, the generation of economic history. And it was one of the peculiarities of my biographical experience that I happened to meet them at that time, stayed friendly with them, and now know most of them, which is why I kept thinking of possibly going back, but never did, to the States.
Can I ask you about Gershon Krohn? I did meet Gershon Krohn a few times, and I heard him give. David Joslin invited, or somehow brought me to listen to him giving they call the Ellen MacArthur lectures.
Yes, I was then in Harvard, and he came over.
This would be in the late 60s.
Oh, the late 60s, no.
The late 60s, I would think. I was a graduate student, like David Joslin, and he came and gave these lectures about economic backwardness already appeared, but it was an extension of that anyway. We're talking about spurts and backwardness. Quite interesting.
Yeah.
Now, what did you were impressed by Gershon Krohn?
Yes, one couldn't fail to be impressed by him. There's a very interesting book written by his grandson called The Fly Swatter, my grandfather the Fly Swatter, or something like that. And that makes the point that he was, without doubt, one of the best educated and most literate of economic historians, of anybody in the world, in terms of his background, his range and so forth. So he was a very impressive person. He could be dogmatic, he could be arrogant, and he could be egocentric, and he was all those things in one sense, but a very attractive personality, and I think he did move the subject forward. The theories haven't all stood up well, but he did try to make sense of economic growth in a historical perspective and relate it to literature and relate it to development. So he was a formidable man. It has to be remembered about Gershon, he was not a new economic historian, but he did in fact foster that generation that I just talked about, and others that we haven't mentioned. Even though they didn't always agree with him, he was a wonderful sort of incubator of what happened to American economic history.
Yeah, did you find him more convincing than Rostow?
Ultimately, yes. I mean, Rostow was very attractive when he first produced the Stage of Economic. It all seemed so precise and logical, and everything seemed to fit in. And then afterwards, you thought, well, it isn't actually an explanatory model. It's a descriptive model, and it's rather predictable. And so one was disabused, whereas Gershon Krohn's was an explanatory model of what happened, and you could see the dynamic, and even though it wasn't always correct, it made things fit together adequately. Much more. I think a different intellect entirely.
I'm not aware that Gershon Krohn came to Britain very often.
No, he didn't.
Whereas Rostow did come to Britain very often, and indeed particularly to Cambridge.
That's right.
I suppose this was because of Poston.
Yes, it was
and they became friends.
Yes, he'd come just before the war. The process of whatever it was called, the thing, the 19th century.
Yeah, well, he was at Oxford. He was at Oxford.
That's right, and he gave lectures and wrote that. And then, but he had the connection with Poston, and would come back frequently. Yes. And I knew Rostow. I knew him in the States, of course. And I mean, he was a good man, but he was egocentric to a fault. Of course. Well, he is egocentric.
Yes.
No, you're not.
This is being recorded, but I have recorded Rostow.
Yes.
With Elspeth shouting corrections off camera.
I don't know. I like Walter. We got on very well indeed, but he could. He felt his own significance.
Yeah.
But also I had this rather peculiar relationship with him and failing to get the job which he'd vacated to go to join Kennedy. I mean, I would have been a junior person, but that was the slot.
Right. So, where does that leave us? I think we've covered more or less everything that I can think of. Obviously, we could make 20 hours of tapes, but do you think there's anything else that we should have covered?
I don't really think so.
You're proposing to continue to come to Economic History Society conferences
Yes.
and to be a part of Economic History?
I hope so, yes. Now that I'm sort of back in half harness anyway, the other job I have half.
Terrific to know that you're still with us.
Good.
Thank you very much for
thank
letting
you.
us come and talk to you today.
Very interesting, and I hope we can listen to it on the 100th anniversary of the year.
I hope so.
Yes.
Thank you.